Well, welcome to another edition of Spotlight on the Collection. I'm here again at the McLeod County Historical Museum in the Historical Gallery. And as you can see, we have our lovely dugout canoe right behind. And we're going to talk about the dugout because we have some exciting news coming up about its history. And just to let you know, this part of the gallery space is completely devoted to the history before white settlement. So we're talking Native American, indigenous peoples. But one of the cool things in this section, although it has a lot of neat stuff about the Dakota culture and the Dakota people who lived here, the piece that I'm standing in front of actually, we believe, predates the Dakota oral tradition of them being in Minnesota. So we really don't know a lot about the people who possibly made this canoe. So I'll back up a little bit. The dugout canoe is about 14 feet long, and so it's a massive piece. By far, it's the oldest and the largest organic artifact that we have here at the museum. So it's definitely worth coming down to take a look at in person. We've written several grants for this piece. When it first came in 1957, we felt that it probably came from, was made in the period of about 1820 to 1840, maybe even into the 1850s. But we found out much later that it was a lot older than that, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. But the dugout canoe is something that, like I said, we've written quite a few grants to learn more about. And the first one takes us back, like I said, to 1957 when it first arrived at the museum. And the story behind that is compliments of Ken Schuman. And it really is due to the Ken Schuman family that we know as much as we do about the dugout canoe. So in 57, in the winter time, I think around December or so, the DNR, Department of Natural Resources, Fisheries Division, were doing some seining work in Big Swan Lake. And we have a map here showing Big Swan Lake. And it was actually in the southern portion that they were seining for carp. This is something that the DNR periodically would do. And when they put in their large nets, it caught and snagged, as I'm sure it happens quite often when they're out seining. But this particular snag caught a dugout canoe, this one right here. They pulled it up, threw it out on the ice, and continued seining. As we have been told by Kenny Schuman, he and a couple other people who were working for DNR at the time thought, you know, after looking at it, boy, that really looks like a Native American dugout canoe. And so after a few weeks, when they got done doing their work, they decided we should probably take this into the Historical Society. And so they did. They brought it, and it sat there from 1957 until about 2011. And like I said, we figured it probably, you know, was from the 1800s. And one day I got a call from Ken Schuman's daughter, and she said, you know, my father has always wondered how old that dugout canoe is, and she wanted to get him a gift, and so she said she would be willing to donate money towards figuring out and carbon testing and officially dating the canoe. And I thought this was just spectacular. Whenever we get an interest like that from the public, to take a closer look at and learn more about our artifacts, it's just great. So she agreed to use her donation as matching money for a grant, and we ended up getting about a $10,000 grant to not only have the canoe tested, but have it evaluated by a professional archaeologist, and all of our native stone tools, which we have quite a few in the collection, evaluated as well. And that grant also paid for a history booklet to be made, this one right here, and it's available at the museum's gift shop. And if you want to learn even more about the indigenous people and about the dugout canoe, you can pick one of these up. So we went ahead and we had the grant done, And samples were taken, and this is kind of an interesting part of how the samples are taken for the dugout canoes, because they actually drill into the piece so that they have a core piece, not on the outside, because the outside could possibly be contaminated. And then we also wanted to know, well, what kind of wood is it? And so in 1992, actually much earlier, they had sent in a small chunk to the University of Minnesota and discovered that it was white oak. So we do know that it is a white oak, and that most dugout canoes were made out of a really hard wood like oak. So a lot of people have said, now, how long had the piece been laying on the ground before someone came along and turned it into a dugout? Well, from experience of people creating and making dugout canoes, a log that's been, felled on its own or been laying there for years and years and years is not going to make a really good quality canoe because of the rot that it would sustain. So more than likely, and typically indigenous peoples would cut down the canoe or cut down the tree or burn the tree and knock it over to create their canoe. Okay, so back to how old is the canoe? And we got the sample back in 2012, and it said that it dated from 1030 to 1220 AD. And when I first opened the letter and got it, I was like, okay, this is a mistake. Because that means our canoe is like 900 years old. And immediately called the archaeologist who had done the evaluation, and sure enough, yes, our canoe is 900 years old, according to that carbon test. Now, this is just one test, but this one test really spurred on an exciting project done by Ann and Chris Merriman, and they are archaeologists, and they work for the Minnesota Heritage Maritime. And they specifically specialize in shipwrecks and ships and the archaeology of it. And they currently right now are doing work on Lake Minnetonka, and I think they've found 50-some different wrecks there. And once they found out about our canoe and that it was 900 years old, or tested to 900 years old, they decided to take a closer look at all the dugouts, and come to find out there are 8 such dugouts known in the state of Minnesota. After going through testing, they received a grant to do a study on all 8, ours included. They discovered that ours is the second oldest, with the one that was found in Lake Minnetonka actually being the oldest. So yeah, second place. But we have decided to take it another step forward, and we're having 2 more carbon tests taken. And it's really exciting. We can't wait to see. Of course, we hope that it either dates it to the same date or maybe a little earlier, so we beat Minnetonka. According to, I'm not an archaeologist, don't study, the carbon testing and everything, but they keep updating it. And so it looks like right now, and we'll of course know more when we get these other 2 tests back, but it looks like that it could possibly actually be a little bit older, and in the grand scheme of 1,000 years, 30 or 40 years is usually the error. So we'll see what they come back. Now, I'm sure you're very excited to learn about what these tests are, and so you can join us. We're going to have a special program at the museum on October 9th. It's a Sunday at 2 o'clock, and Ann and Chris will both be there to reveal the tests and explain it. Another exciting thing that they did that we'll be revealing at this program, and maybe we have a shot of them working here on the canoe, is we did a full scan. They have this dandy little device where they went over the whole piece, and you can 3-dimensionally turn the piece around, take a close-up depth of the piece, because the canoe is quite large, as you can see. It's 14 feet, like I said, long, but it's also about 22 feet wide at the widest point, but only about 7 inches deep. And it doesn't make for a very good canoe if it's only 7 inches deep, but obviously it's 1,000 years old, and when they were bringing it up, I'm sure sustained some damage to the sidewells when they were bringing it in also just being stuck in the mud. So it is technically from Meeker County, but what I like to say is that Big Swan Lake connects to the north part of the Crow River, and I can imagine that canoe being taken up the Crow River and right into McLeod County. But one thing you need to know about these dugout canoes, it is a white oak, so you can imagine portaging this piece would not have ever happened. It would have been too heavy and too bulky. So this piece would have been probably created and only used on and around that spot in that vicinity. We're assuming that the native peoples who made it were probably seasonal travelers, and they probably came back there every year. They would have sunk the canoe in the water, in the mud, with stones or rocks, remembered where it was at, and then come back to use it. And I'm guessing someone forgot where it was, and then unfortunately the DNR seining crew on their nets found it again. But lucky for us that they did, because really once we find out and pin down these dates, this opens up a whole new chapter in McLeod County's history. When we think about our earliest history in McLeod County, we think of the Dakota peoples. This 1030 AD predates their oral tradition of them coming into this part of Minnesota. So who were these people who made this canoe? You know, I just can't wait to learn more about it. So we do know, though, how these canoes were actually made. It's done in what we call the burn and scrape method, so it is literally dug out. And they use, there were specialized tools that were probably used to make it. Now this is one from the museum's collection. It's an axe, or more specifically a celt axe. And what it is it's just a big chunk of rock that has been smoothed and worked into a very sharp edge at the end. So it would have been a handheld tool. It's not grooved, so it wouldn't have been hefted or attached to anything. And if you can imagine, they've got the log down, they found the side that they want to use to dig it out. They would burn it. They'd add clay or wet grass or water to the side wells so that the sides didn't burn, just the middle burned. And after it burned down for a while, they would chisel out probably an inch, inch and a half. So it would have been a really slow process, but that burning would have softened the wood and they could shape it. Now, if our canoe is 900 years old, that's before metal tools were introduced by Europeans. So stone would have been the primary way that they would have created this canoe. And you can tell, at least the archaeologists can tell, and they pointed out certain things on the canoe. On each of the ends, you can see that there are knots left in, there are bulky parts and holes. You know, if they would have had metal tools, they could have smoothed those out and done a better job. Our piece, you can tell, you know, they just didn't have the detail tools like metal that would have been able to do that work. So it primarily would have been done using a stone like this. Now that piece too is similar. This is, I think, would have been a little easier to use, but probably not as effective. But this is also a celt, and we have several of these at the museum along with a lot of other Native American tools. Now, some of those tools are from the Archaic period, which is very, very old. But these particular tools more than likely would have dated to the same time period, which would have been the late woodland period, which is what our canoe is from. Now, the woodland period was a huge chunk of time. So 1000 BC to 1000 AD. And we're looking at our canoe being on the later end of that. So that 1030 date. But these tools would have been something that would have been used during that time period. Both of those were found in McLeod County, by the way, in Winsted Township and around Winsted Lake. And a lot of our collections at the museum that are native stone tools were found around lakes. And just, we have a wonderful collection, but that's another program sometime. Back to the canoe though. So after we found out how old the canoe actually was, in the display area here, as you can see, it has a lovely bonnet over it that protects it. That wasn't always the case. But when we found out how old it was, we thought, you know, we probably shouldn't let the school kids crawl inside of it anymore. And we decided we were going to protect it. So we are so lucky in the state of Minnesota. We have the legacy funds, and it was a actual legacy grant that was awarded to the museum to do the first carbon testing, to put together the history booklet, and then later a phase 2 that actually we built and protected it with this lovely bonnet. So it also is humidity controlled, and it has circulation. So that's something that's really important, because unfortunately the only way that we could stop deterioration of the canoe, because it is an organic piece, it's made of wood, would have been to leave it in the mud in the lake, which I'm not a big fan of, because I want to see it and look at it and learn from it. So we're lucky that it is up here, but unfortunately now it is very fragile. It has dried out. It's very, very dry. And so every time it's touched, it crumbles. Little pieces of it fall off. We're saving those pieces though, and we're hoping to write a future grant and involve school kids in understanding and studying the canoe. So these small pieces could be looked at under a microscope, and we can see what we can learn from it. Another great thing, because of the fragility of the canoe, is so fragile, we don't want to touch it any more than we have to. We're doing things like the scan that Ann and Chris did. Like I said, on October 9th, we're going to show the scan and what's possible with it, but we're also hoping to even do more scanning. So maybe one more grant where we actually lift the piece up, we do a 360 scan of the whole piece, and then from then on, we can use that piece of digitized material to study the canoe, and also bring it hopefully into the classroom along with our little sample pieces, so kids can study and learn about archaeology as well. So I encourage you to come to the museum to learn more about the canoe, and also about McLeod County's earliest residents. Right now, we don't know a huge amount about who made our canoe, but we're learning more, and it's really exciting to stand in front of the canoe and wonder who were the people who built that. I also want to invite you, we have a great program coming up. It's a fundraiser for the museum. As you know, it's very expensive to run the museum, and so we have to have these fundraisers, but we have a really fun way that you can support it, and it's called Cheers to History. The very first event is going to be on Monday evening, September 19th. That's going to be at Landy's Lodge, and they have been nice enough, with your $25 donation to the museum, you get a free drink and half off your meal, plus you get invited to the next event, and you get a free drink and half off a meal at Main Street Sports Bar on Monday evening, September 26th. Now, this is Cheers to History, so we're telling stories, some probably unknown to a lot of people, some maybe a little scandalous, and I brought a few artifacts from the museum that we're going to be talking about. So some people may or may not recognize this box. If you've been to the museum, we've had some displays done that featured it, but this particular artist's box probably witnessed the earliest, and I hope only, gentlemen's club in Hutchinson, Minnesota. So, if boxes could talk. And this little artifact may have witnessed the founding of Hutchinson itself. And we'll learn all about that on the 19th. So I hope you'll join me in a cheers to history, and come out and support the museum and help us raise much needed funds to finish out 2016. So thank you, and I'll see you at the museum.